Writing for me is also like a prayer. It's also a communion with the divine and a co-creation with the divine, because I do think inspiration is so cool, because so many times I think as an artist, I mean, I can't speak for other artists, but I can speak for myself. I feel like these ideas just seem to come from somewhere outside of me. And that feels like a very co-creative work. And it's just so cool to get in the flow of that in my work.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Guiding Light, where we help you follow sources of peace in your life. I'm Sierra Larson,
I'm Jenna Carson.
and today we have the awesome opportunity to interview our co host, Jenna, on writing as a spiritual and healing process. We all know Jenna as an Air Force chaplain and a former prison chaplain, but each chapter of her chaplaincy has shaped her voice as a writer. Jenna explores moral complexity, grief, healing, and what it means to show up for one another. Her essays have appeared in New York Times, Wayfair, Deseret Magazine, and Deseret News. I want to say welcome, but like you're already here. We always have you on the show, but I want to say actually just congratulations on your success as a writer. And you've always been an amazing writer, and just now being able to see the world reading all of your articles and everything that you have is just like so amazing. So I'm personally just so proud of you and so excited to dive in on all of your writing.
Thanks, Sierra. I wouldn't call myself an amazing writer, and I don't mean that as something that's self-deprecating, but I had a teacher in college, my first creative writing class. I remember he stood in front of us and said, I'd consider myself a good enough writer. I'm not a great writer. I'm not a genius, but I work at it and it's good enough." And that really shaped me, because writing is really hard. And for a lot of us engaged in creative practices, whether it's writing or painting or any other creative work, we can always look at like the greats. I think about, for example, how Stephen King pumps out so many books, or Agatha Christie or J.K. Rowling, these writers who are just producing masses of work. And so I don't know, it helps take some of the pressure off me if I just say, you know what, Jenna, it's good enough for me to be good enough. I try hard, I work hard, I want to shape it, I want to be better, I want to grow as a writer, but I don't have to like try to be the very best, just my best for whatever
Yeah.
that's worth. I wanted to share that.
No, that's awesome. I love that you bring that up. And it sounds like it's a discipline for you to write. Talk a little bit more about your habits and the tools that you use for your writing.
Yeah, well, I want to say that like when I first started out, so I started my first creative writing class in college, and I remember just getting myself to sit down and write was such a hard thing. It was so hard. It was not something that came freely and naturally to me. I procrastinated until the last minute before something was due. And basically, wow, it's been, I guess, 11 years, 11 or 12 years since that first creative writing class. Yeah, I think 11 years. And what I've really learned is you do get better when you have a discipline and a practice. So, what happened was when I started working in the prison, I felt very compelled to write about what I was witnessing as a prison chaplain. And this to me felt like a divine calling. Like it felt like something outside of me, a divine force, the being I call God, my higher power, was calling me to write and witness. And so I had to develop discipline, because I knew if I don't write it now, I'm going to lose these things. I'm going to forget these details. So I had this discipline of setting a timer every day when I came home from work. I would write. And I started out, I can't even remember how many minutes I started out with, but I know what I got consistently going was 20 minutes. Now, for serious writers, we know, and I do call myself a serious writer now, 20 minutes a day, it adds up to a lot, but it's certainly not enough. Because, like, when I got deep into my book, I was pouring, hours into it. But having a discipline of showing up, setting a timer, making myself write almost every day really shaped me. And now writing to me is just as important in my routine as sleeping and brushing my teeth and eating. It's something I feel like I have to do. And if I don't do it, I can feel it. I start getting kind of like off kilter. And so discipline of setting a timer really helps me. Some other tools that I use are simply reading the great works of other writers and being inspired by them. And it's not just writing that I consume. I appreciate visual art and film and other sources of inspiration. And so those are just some things that help me feel fresh in my creative work, have motivation to keep showing up. And it's certainly not easy to keep showing up, but it's gotten more natural with time and discipline.
Okay, definitely. And talk a little bit more. I would love to hear more about the creative process of writing. You mentioned that your writing, you felt compelled in
Mhm.
that time to write. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that feels like or that inspiration that comes to you?
That is a great question. Have you ever had something in your life where you just know that you have to do it? There's just no other way. Like, you know that if you don't do it, either something wrong is going to happen or you are going to regret it for the rest of your life. And I've never quite had the same energy around a project as I did writing my memoir, which, by the way, is not even published yet. It's with an agent. This is a long process, right? But wow, I feel so relieved having done that work because it was just one of those things I knew deep inside. And it was almost like this force of momentum pushing me to do it. And even though I didn't necessarily want to because it was so painful, I just could not stop thinking about it. And I would wake up in the middle of the night with scenes in my mind and lines from the day before that happened at work running through my head, dialogue that had happened. And it was just pouring out of me. Now, that doesn't mean that writing it was so easy, but that inspiration, that forward momentum, that energy was very real. And it was quite exhausting. Like that time period in my life when I was writing this book was one that I cherish because it was very distinct for me because I was working full time. And then when I left the prison, I was in boot camp and then I was in the military full time. So I was doing all these really rigorous jobs during the day and then trying to find time to write on the nights and weekend. And it was a sort of sacrifice that I would have to choose to write over social time or, little things that aren't that important, like scrolling social media. I might not be the best of cooking and cleaning my house at that time in my life because I just knew that the writing was more important and that was just such a cool thing to feel.
So you mentioned that that was a really busy time for you. We've talked about in other episodes, there was a lot going on in that moment with the prison, the military, your personal life. And through it all, you were able to write. And it sounds like writing really helped you in those moments as well. How has writing been a healing process for you?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that happened is my husband left me during this time. And so I think writing was a way of processing what I was experiencing, the violence that I was witnessing in the prison, and I'd say also the psychological violence of working in a place. It's not only physical violence and the grief of my husband walking out on our marriage so early on, too, in the marriage. I really used writing as a way to like organize and make sense of what was happening. And it didn't feel organized as I was writing it, but I can look back and see as the project continued to evolve, I could see how things were connecting and how I was operating in the prison and how I was so isolated in so many ways in my life at the time. And as I was writing, I didn't even realize how isolated I was because writing was sort of like a friend. It was a practice that I kept coming home to. And I definitely turned to God, and I did have some wonderful people in my life at the time. So I kept coming home to this familiar practice of writing and knowing that when everything else was feeling like it was falling apart in my life, because I did seem to lose so many things. at that time. Like I lost a marriage, I lost a job. Oh my goodness. I was in an accident, like a car accident. Writing was a consistent. So many things in my life just were way out of my control, but the one thing I could control was like showing up for a creative practice and really a practice that to me is very spiritual. So it helped me, I think, get through it all. And writing for me is also like a prayer. It's also a communion with the divine and a co-creation with the divine because I do think inspiration is so cool because so many times I think as an artist, I mean, I can't speak for other artists, but I can speak for myself. I feel like these ideas just seem to come from somewhere outside of me. And that feels like a very co-creative work. And it's just so cool to get in the flow of that in my work. And most days with writing and producing art, I think there are a lot of frustrations and a lot of times where I don't feel like things are working. But then it's like I get in a flow state and I feel this co-creation with something outside of myself that is, I would say, very spiritual for me.
Definitely. And I'm curious about, and I know I have the kind of this insight into this question. When you were done writing your book, your memoir, and having this initial fear of people reading it almost, people knowing about the divorce and knowing about so many deep and personal things about your life, that vulnerability can be terrifying at times. What was your process to just say, here is my art, this thing that I have worked on for so long, and I'm putting it out into the world? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, well, I will say it's still not quite out into the world because even though I think probably at this point, 20 of my close friends and family and literary agents and potential publishers, I think we can say about 20 people have read the manuscript. But it's still not out in the wide world. So this will definitely be an interesting thing for me to experience in the future when it is published. But what I like to do when I write is something that Cheryl Strayed actually suggested recently. I recently took a workshop with her. It was really cool. And she was saying, write your first draft as if no one will ever read it. I know she's not the only one who says this. As artists, we have to make art for the sake of telling the truth. In my opinion, art is about truth telling and it also about meaning making and for me, it's about seeing things clearly. And so I have to write a first draft just as I see it happening, not censor, not try to protect people. But as I went back throughout the draft, throughout the memoir, there were certain things I could omit to protect certain people, change their name, and I was able to kind of over time make choices on how much needs to be told in order to tell the story. And so I think for anyone who's writing, start writing the truth as you see it, as you remember it, all the details that need to come out, and just trust that with time you can protect yourself. A really good example of this is I recently wrote a very vulnerable essay called Blood and Milk, and it was published in Wayfair magazine. And this is a really heavy essay about loss and about women's bodies. And the first draft was so raw, and there were so many things in there about people that I've worked with that were very, very specific. And as a chaplain, I have to respect confidentiality. So, what happened is when I went back and revised it, I sent it to some of the people that I had written about in the essay to ask permission. And I also just tried to make sure that every detail served a purpose and that there was nothing in there that was trying to, I don't know, like rat someone out for the sake of ratting them out, like make them look bad for the sake of looking bad, if that makes sense. And so I just really try to have integrity to what the art needs to do.
Yeah, so that's another example of how you were able to process these experiences, these really painful experiences through writing. What would you say if someone is carrying this deep emotional pain that they don't really discuss and might want to take steps towards healing by using writing? And if they're not a writer or anything, how would you suggest they use writing as a healing process?
Well, Julia Cameron talks about this in her book, The Artist's Way. She talks about this practice called morning pages, which is when you wake up in the morning, you write stream of conscious. So whatever comes to your mind, unfiltered, no matter how ugly it is, no matter how embarrassing it is, no matter how much you may not like it, you write stream of conscious. I think she says for 3 full pages. And then you can destroy those pages, or some people may choose to keep a notebook that's only for their eyes. And I think that's a really good way to process through writing. And a friend of mine practices this religiously, and she says it's a way to purge all the things that are getting in the way of her progression in life. I have not been as diligent with that as a daily practice, but I do often journal. And so I think for anyone, no matter where you are on your spectrum of writing ability, that's something that most people can do. But then some people hate writing. And so I want to say for anyone who hates writing, find another way. Like draw, paint, make music, compose, whatever creative practice fuels your soul. Floral arrangements. I think there's power in creative work. And again, I mention this book often, but The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk talks about different practices of embodiment that can also help with processing trauma and difficulty.
Okay. Yeah. And I know on this show we have talked about writing prayers. As chaplains, we write prayers and writing as a form of prayer. Can you talk about that practice in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many ways to pray. So for me, I actually made a note of this earlier. I was thinking about how prayer means coming into the presence of God, or rather slowing down to perceive the presence of God and commune with God. And I think there are so many ways to do that through song, through stillness, through listening for God's voice, through speaking words directed to God, and through any creative act. And so I see writing and creative practice as prayer because that can be your time or one of your times. I'm not saying this is the only way you commune with God, but it can be a way to commune and work with God. And there was a time in my life that I received understanding that for me, making time to create is not just like fun fluff, or it's not, just the work of writing the memoir that I was compelled to write. Creative practice is divinely ordained time for God and for me. And I now hold writing as this sacred time. It's not just like, oh, I should write, I should do this. It's literally sacred time. And a very wise woman said to me, she said, Jenna, you owe yourself and you owe the divine that time. It has tremendous value. And I think the reason it has that value and the reason it's a prayer is because it's something that like I feel called to do.
Yeah, I love that. Been thinking about my creative processes, and sometimes creativity just comes out of me in whatever way it does. Like sometimes it's writing, sometimes it's song, sometimes it's a podcast, like whatever it is, it comes out. Mostly it comes out verbally. And so I'm a therapist, I'm talking to people a lot, and it's usually a story or a metaphor that'll come out that will help somebody in a way that's almost like a parable. And lately my relationship with writing has been, if I don't write this down, then this wisdom dies with me. And that has been really powerful for me because I do have a lot of things that I've learned and that I share with people that are really helpful and healing. But if I don't write it down, then it's almost like gate kept. It's only for the people that are in session with me when it could be for the world, and it could be helpful and healing to many people. And so by sharing our art, sharing our inspiration, sharing our creativity, we inspire and help and heal other people. And if we're afraid to let people see that, then our creativity, our mind, our beauty, the most amazing things will never outlive us. And
Mhm.
they go when we do. So I love that.
Right. And also, Sierra, as you were talking, I'm also thinking about how, every moment in our lives is new and then it's done. And then we have another moment. And creativity, I think, in creative practice is amazing. And I think it's very godlike if you think of God as a creator, because there are infinite ways to create. And any different new version of myself in any different new moment is going to create differently than the me in the past. And so I I think of this line in Hamilton, the musical, where I can't even remember who is singing this. I think several of the characters sing this throughout the musical. Why do you
You
write
write like
like
you're
you're
running
running out of
out.
time?
Yeah.
Why do you write like
Write
you're
like you're running out of time. Right day and night. Like,
right? And it's just like, well, because we are running out of time. And I mean, I don't want to be like alarmist or, like anxious about it, but the old self is constantly passing away. Our cells are constantly renewing and we're changing and morphing and so our art can change and morph. And so yeah, like I think I love what you said. And I also think what we write will change, what we produce will change. And so, me, Jenna, I'm like, I can't sell myself short. I can't be wasting time scrolling on social media when my art needs to be made. Not that there, I mean, don't get me wrong, I still scroll on social media. There's a time and a place, but I just think that like, I just feel this drive to seize the day when it comes to my work because
yeah.
the way I write and experience today is different from the way I would have written it yesterday, the way I'll write it tomorrow, 2 days from now, 2 years from now.
Yeah. I heard someone say this and I try to live by this is try to create more than you consume.
I love that.
So scrolling, there's nothing wrong with scrolling but that's consumption. There's nothing wrong with watching TV, but that's consumption. So as much as you're consuming, try to outproduce that with what you're creating.
Yeah, and use what you're consuming to inspire you. I mean, last night I watched this really disturbing movie that was so well written, and I knew it was going to be a disturbing movie for me. I knew it, but I chose to watch it because it won an Oscar for best screenplay. You all are probably wondering what this movie is. I think it's called A Promising Young Woman. I think that's the title. It's really an intense movie, really well done, and I finished the movie and I was just kind of praying and thinking about it. And I was thinking about how I'm about to take the screenwriting class that I'm really excited to take. And I thought, okay, what principles are you going to learn from this really intense, really difficult film you just saw? And how are you going to create art inspired by that? And so I started writing ideas for my own screenplay, and I realized how wonderfully shaped I was in that moment because of that film. And life goes on. Today I'm doing my other things. Tomorrow I'll be doing more things. I needed in that moment to capture how it felt to create art after consuming that film.
Wow, Jenna, I absolutely love that. Do you have anything else for us? Anything that's on your mind or your heart that you feel inspired to share with listeners today?
One thing that comes to mind right now is how we live in an age of comparison because we can constantly get insights into curations of other people's lives through social media. I think we can spend a lot of time comparing ourselves to other people's work. And so, my advice for somebody who is getting started, creating a discipline for art is, it may be a time to kind of shut down some of the outside voices. So when I started writing my book, I was praying. I was like, God, I need you to teach me how to write a book because I didn't know how. I mean, I had taken writing classes, but I really felt like I just don't know how to write a book. I need you to teach me. And one of the things I felt really strongly I needed to do was get off social media. I didn't delete it or anything, but the apps were off my phone. I spent many months kind of not checking it, not posting, really drawing into this creative work with the divine. And so I think just do what you need to do, and it's going to feel like a sacrifice, but make the changes you need to make to try to produce something and to not look at what other people are producing. Now, I'm contradicting myself because I just said I watched this movie that inspired me, right? Just use your wisdom to gauge when you need to stop consuming for a time in a season and not compare yourself to other people's work. And then my one other piece of advice is to remember that you have gifts and talents and perceptions and perspectives that no one else has. And Sierra, you talked earlier about, how our work is not just for us, it's a blessing for others. And one of my affirmations, mantras, prayers is God, help me do this for the greater good of the world. Like, don't get me wrong. I don't think I'm going to like save the world with something I produce artistically. I'm not having some ego like, oh, like this is the thing that's going to make a huge, huge impact. But what in my sphere, in my understanding of the world, in my creative capacity, what can make a difference and help me, God, just I don't really know what that is, but help guide me so that this is for my highest good and for the highest good of others. And so that's a prayer that I think every artist can keep in mind. And that's what I've got.
I mentioned this a little bit about putting your art into the world, but I do have a question about being published
Yeah.
and that process. And was there any sort of like imposter syndrome when going to get published in these magazines or feeling like, I'm not sure if this is good enough? And how were you able to overcome that in order to just send it out there?
I'm just laughing because I feel like imposter syndrome is part of my life. I mean, I think I said this in another episode somewhere. I feel it all the time everywhere. Like, I think people perceive me as this really confident person, and it's so funny because sometimes I am really confident, but like the majority of my life, I'm just like, how am I here? Do I belong here? Whether it was grad school or the prison or the military or in my writing, I have imposter syndrome so often, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I feel like I feel like staying humble, and recognizing that there's so many great people in the world doing so many good things is not a bad thing. But then it's like, well, my voice does belong. And so let's just see where it's a good fit. So I'll say that like rejection is a huge part of creating art and writing. I'm just laughing because before I got the Modern Love piece in the New York Times, which is a huge breakthrough. I mean, that's a huge thing. And it feels like winning the lottery because I'm sure that there are so many writers who deserve to be there just as much as I do, right? But leading up to the publication of that essay, I was getting rejection after rejection after rejection. It felt that way. It felt that way from like I had submitted some op-ed pieces to the New York Times and I had pitched some op-ed ideas to the Atlantic and I just felt, ow, it just hurts. And so I share that with you all because honestly, you just have to keep going. Like the imposter syndrome and the rejection, I think for many of us will be a continual part of life. I think there are some writers and artists who they're so good at their craft and they just get out there so much. I feel like they could probably publish anything they want now, but for the majority of us in the world, rejection and imposter syndrome are human feelings that we will feel and we can move through them. So, like, as much as we need to create art and develop discipline in our creation of art, meaning we make time for it, I think we also, to get it out in the world, must develop resiliency to rejection. And yeah, I keep getting rejected. My manuscript still isn't published because it's being rejected. And I had an offer recently, but it wasn't the right fit. It wasn't the right publisher. And it kind of hurt to be like, this is not the right fit because there's a voice in me saying, well, is it ever going to get out into the world? But, I I just hold it lightly and I have faith that when it's supposed to get into the world, it'll have the right vehicle, you know? So
Yeah.
a friend, I'll share one last thing on this because yesterday I was talking to a wise spiritual friend of mine and I was saying, do I need to change this book? Because the person interested in me publishing this book wanted me actually to make it more of a Christian audience. It's really not intended for a Christian audience. It's really intended for a secular broad audience. I said, "Am I supposed to change this book?" She said, "No. No, 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 no. No, no." She said, "Change your relationship to this book. Hold it more loosely. Hold it before God. Hold it loosely and trust that when the world is ready to receive it and when it's the right timing to be the most good for the most people in the world, it's going to get out into the world." And that helps. So, yeah, those are my thoughts. I love writing, as you can tell. I'm so passionate about this. I love the process of creation. And oh gosh, I keep having more to say. Okay, I keep saying one more thing, but I think this is just the one more thing. I- I've been thinking about how I used to have this fear that I would like run out of inspiration, run like after writing this book about this really cool experience, really intense, singular experience working in a prison, like, there's a lot of shocking things. I thought, well, what in the world am I going to write after this? Like, what is even going to there's nothing that will be as important as this. And I realized that there's this kind of magic or miracle nature of creation, which is like when we keep going and just create for the sake of the process and not worry about like where is this going to end up or how is it going to be any good. But when we keep moving forward, life just continually gives us material. There will continually be inspiration. Like recently, I had this TV producer and screenwriter. She's the one who approached me and said, "Have you thought about screenwriting? I'd love to mentor you." I'm like, "What? Is this real life?" And then also randomly got into poetry writing, which I never thought I would be able to do. And so I just share that to say, like, as you take one step in your creative process, then you'll take another, then you'll take another. You're not gonna get to a point where you can't keep creating. So just trust that you'll keep evolving. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your continued wisdom that you give us as our co-host here and just for sharing this piece of you and yourself and your world. So,
Thanks.
where can listeners hear more about or see more about your writing?
Thanks for asking. So if you go to jennacarson.com, I have an email list. So you can sign up for my list. And I have only ever emailed my subscribers once. I'm like terrified of annoying people in their inbox, but I promise, I will be in touch. It may just be like once every few months or something, but yeah, I'll let you know. And I'm on Instagram, Jenna the Chaplain. So I'd love to be in touch.
Thank you. And action item today, create, be inspired, and don't be afraid to put that inspiration out into the world. Your creation, there's space for your creation in this world. So
Oh,
go ahead and create and share it.
yeah. And if you need to, set a timer.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sierra Larson,
Jenna Carson.
and we hope you follow the peace.